Well, picking up where Alexia left off, we're going to move the discussion now into one of, from women startups more into funding women startups specifically and funding in general into the venture capital discussion, because the number of women entrepreneurs that have successfully raised venture funding is woeful. I mean, the numbers are so small. So let's really delve now into those barriers of funding, of advocacy, and action in venture capital, because it is time to sort of shift those perceptions. How can we create a real paradigm shift for us? So please welcome our moderator and venture capital expert and social and media producer, startup coach, Pemo Theodore.
Hi, everyone. I was first wanting to know if Rachel Sheinbein's here. Oh, thank you. They've got to mic you, I think, darling. Oh, great to see everyone here today, sorry. You can tell what planet I'm on. Okay, I think we've lost one female venture capitalist that was signed up, unfortunately, and we also lost a male venture capitalist. This is the world of venture capital. They get pulled 5,000 different ways, so we're pretty lucky to have the three fabulous ones that we've got today. So glad to see you. So we'll start off the panel today, and I'll let everyone introduce themselves. I think it's much less formal, and also they could probably tell a few stories about their experience as female venture capitalists. So I'd like to introduce Rachel Sheinbein from CMA.
Hi, I'm Rachel, and I am a partner at CMEA Capital. We're a firm that invests in life science, IT, and energy and materials. I invest almost exclusively in energy and materials startups. I'll leave it out there. I guess we'll get into more interesting things later.
Okay. Hi, I'm Stephanie Palmeri. I'm with SoftTech VC. We're a micro VC fund focused on seed stage investments in consumer web and mobile.
Great.
And I'm Sharon Weinbar. I'm a partner at Scale Venture Partners. We invest in companies that are scaling their growth, so not really early stage companies, typically after the product's done, while it's on the market and growing. We do internet, mobile, cloud, SaaS, not clean tech, not life sciences, and personally I focus on consumer-facing technologies.
Fabulous, thank you so much. So firstly, I'm really excited because, as you know, I've been working to support female venture capitalists and female entrepreneurs, and I've just seen so much increase in intensity and focus of that in the last year, if I've been doing it for almost 2 years. And I was wondering what you've noticed in your firms, whether or not you're seeing more females come in to pitch. Could you tell me how that's looking for you guys?
So we track deals on a lot of different metrics. We're a heavy user of Salesforce for deal tracking, because deals are our widgets. And we don't track male versus female, but I would say it's reasonably steady, and it's an incredibly small number. Okay. Which I hate to say, but that is honest truth. There are, I think, probably more. I have a lot of women entrepreneur friends who are raising their seed rounds and struggling to raise their A rounds, and sometimes getting them, and sometimes having to get more traction to get their A than you might think they would need. But at the stage that we invest in, there aren't that many women. I mean, I wish there were more, but I haven't backed a women entrepreneur since 2003.
Wow.
So I guess my picture's slightly more rosy.
Oh, good.
So I'm a seed investor, and we actually talked about this morning at our partner meeting, and say about 10% of our 120 some odd companies in the portfolio have a woman as a co-founder of some sort. So I think that's pretty good. And in the last quarter or so, we've backed a few women-led companies. In fact, we actually backed a founding team of 2 women in a company called True & Co. that just announced their funding last week. So, and focused on a female category. So it's a e-commerce play around women's intimates apparel. So kind of an unusual investment, and I was happy to be part of that. But one thing we've noticed in the course of the last year or so is that while the number of females coming to SoftTech have been relatively steady, we've definitely seen a shift towards a lot more in e-commerce and away from a lot of the other sort of traditional types of companies we've invested in, much less so. So I don't know, I can't really say statistically with any relevance whether or not women founders are going more towards this traditionally female sort of category, or if there's just less women starting companies in other areas right now.
I know that a couple of years ago it was about 3 to 5% women getting venture, and Kaufman report, I think from 2009 now, say 9%. So it sounds like there is actually a tangible effect happening, as well as all the buzz that I'm noticing as myself. What about you, Rachel?
I think in energy, there's a dearth of women both investing in it and in startups. I see a lot more with my partners on the life science side that their chief medical officers at the firm are women. But I would agree with you just from being involved with ASTIA and Women 2.0 and other organizations that I'm just seeing a lot more, and maybe it's because I'm involved and has nothing to do with the reality, but you read your own buzz on Twitter.
Drink the Kool-Aid.
But you're starting to just see a lot more, I feel like a lot more articles, a lot more conversation around these topics and interest. And then some women entrepreneurs moving forward. And I personally have a bias. That I am involved in a nonprofit that encourages girls in STEM and science, technology, engineering, math, so working on the pipeline. And then I do make more of an effort. A lot of men, I think I'm a part-time job as a career finder. I don't know if you guys feel the same sometimes, because people know you have a broad network and are seeing a lot of companies. And I often am a little more willing to take calls from women who are interested in getting involved, because I'd like to see more of them too. I am the only woman partner and investor at all at my firm, and I'd love to see a change on the entrepreneur side as well as women, and being in all the boardrooms where I'm often the only woman, and sometimes not always the youngest, but I'd love to start seeing a shift of who those people are, and I feel like that's part of my responsibility is to be involved in that.
So. Stephanie, you were saying that you're noticing a change in the types of businesses that are coming in pitching for seed rounds. What do you all think are the real great areas for women entrepreneurs to get involved in? Like, what are the businesses that are really full of potential coming up? And I know you're at all different stages and different industries. Maybe you could give us some hints.
Well, I mean, I think founders and entrepreneurs should go after areas where they have unique insights, and can make a difference. And you shouldn't think of yourself as being in a woman-oriented job. I mean, as Stephanie said, there's a resurgence of interest in e-commerce because of the recession caused a massive failure of old brick-and-mortar retailing, and there's a lot of new technologies that are allowing new e-commerce companies to come to the fore, and a lot of the infrastructure exists for that, so they become, as startups, more marketing vehicles. Thank you.
Did someone flush the toilet? Oh my God. Was that symbolic? Sorry, Sharon.
What does that sound?
What? That's the first, anyway.
We're getting a lot of feedback. But anyway, so you can build, as lots of web infrastructure exists, you can build web-facing businesses and commerce businesses that are more marketing vehicles and business model plays than they are deep tech companies. And, and as Rachel pointed out, I mean, the pipeline of women coming through hardcore tech is an extreme trickle. I mean, this is one of my big issues, and I have 2 daughters who are both into STEM, but specifically not into computer science. And they keep asking me, why do I rag on them about, please take computer science classes? And I finally said, because if we want to close the earnings gap, then some women have to be in the highest paid things. You can never get to the average if you have no women, if you have no people in the above average jobs. But back to your original question, I mean, we should all be focused on the things that we can be really good at.
Great, yeah, good answer.
So I think the reality for me as a seed investor and our firm is simply we're going to back the best entrepreneurs with the best ideas. So we look at 3 things. We look at the founding team, we look at the market, and we look at the product. We call it our 3 asses rule. It's got to be a kick-ass team, or sorry, a smart-ass team, a kick-ass product, and a big-ass market. And so if you're a woman founding a company and you can check all 3 boxes, then you qualify. And same with if you're a man, it really doesn't matter. Are there certain categories that women are more prone to start companies in? Yeah, I think again, it goes back to that. If you have a unique insight into a market that someone else doesn't have, and I'll mention True again. The founders of True had a pretty unique insight into what it's like to try on bras, and how painful that experience or how frustrating that experience might be. And that unique insight, I would argue, is probably not something that a male founder likely has because he hasn't experienced it. But that's another challenge. I think that's the challenge I found with a lot of companies that are geared very strongly towards women, founded by women, is you have to find a way to communicate that female-oriented business in a way that the potentially male VC that you're pitching is going to understand. And then most likely, I mean, if you're a female founder and you've pitched a male VC with a female-oriented company, how many times has someone said to you, well, I showed this to my wife and, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you know that he's likely going to show it to his wife. So therefore, don't just let him show it to his wife and use his words. Why don't you give him a list of questions that talk about your industry and your product in a way that he now knows how to ask his wife the right questions, so she gives him the right answers, so that she says, yeah, this is actually something I would use. Or if I was a 22-year-old woman, I might use this. So I think that's
some good tips there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And the funny thing is, how many times have you been pitched by a male founder who comes in with an idea that's a very woman-oriented business and says, I had this idea because my wife.
Yes.
Because, and you think,
At least once a week.
so you live in Atherton and have a wife with, a closet full of something. This is not a normal American problem, the problem that your wife has.
Right, right.
The quote-unquote problem that your wife
Exactly.
has is not really a problem.
You guys are continually popping bubbles then. What about you, Rachel? Any ideas?
Yeah, I would just go off of either you're starting something because you have that problem yourself, and so you want to solve it, or you have a passion in it, or the skill set. And sometimes I've seen founders who end up, they were kind of going down one path, but they're really passionate about something else, and that's where they ended up being a startup. Or people who, there's a lot of entrepreneurs too who might not care that much about the content, but they really like the game of building a company and working with smart people, and they stumbled upon an idea and went from there. So, I don't think that there's a kind of cut and dry, do these things, but I think that passion part of it, whether it's the actual content or the people involved, has to be there, because it's going to take a lot of hard work and a lot of days where you're like, why am I doing this? So start off at least with that going for you.
So I know in the venture capital industry, a lot of people have been accused of running to the one crap table and placing their bets on that, and that there's hot startups that people want to be invested in. I'm not really hearing that from you guys. Is that the truth? Is that where you really come from in your investments, that you really are actioning what you're telling us, or is there other stuff going on, just to educate us?
On our deal track, we use a software called TrackVia, our little database thing that is a startup actually, and to track our deals. And we, for a long time, at the corner had a picture of a lemming, just to remind us that we don't all have to jump overboard like the lemmings. But but it is that can be challenging, because especially when you see certain areas hot and moving, and then you're like, why am I banging my head against the wall, you know, to do something so different?
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of back and forth. You know, you don't want to necessarily follow the herd because that valuations or whatever doesn't make sense, but you want to be creative at what you're starting, especially if you're super early stage. So having that kind of balance, it's if everyone around you, if they're smart, they might be smart. It might not be a lemming syndrome, but constantly being critical of why you're inspired by that area of investing.
It's funny. I mean, I find as a seed investor, the investments I see come in waves. So January, for example, I must have seen in the month of January a ton of companies focused on consumer health, which, you know, I have no idea if that has to do with like starting the new year.
It's actually a highly
relevant,
business.
right?
Everybody comes back from the
but
holidays.
It's, you know, so you see these like sort of patterns emerge. So yeah, you do see like these sectors that become hot, or these areas that a lot of people are doing things in. I think for, you know, the advantage as a seed investor is you get to see a lot of them very early in generally a big clump. And so, you know, local loyalty was another thing I've seen a lot of. And, you know, you may not, you know, we as a firm, we may like a space and we may be interested in looking at a space, but if we don't see what we think is going to be what we believe is the clear winner based on, again, that 3 criteria I mentioned, then we opt to not make a bet. And, you know, different firms have different structures. You know, some firms say we want to make a lot of bets in an area we think is going to be hot. You know, we look at different areas and we say, if we feel like this is the winner in this space, then we're going to back this one. So it depends on the fund's strategy, I think, more than anything else.
Right, yeah. Do you want to pipe in there?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, sometimes there is a new pervasive need that arises in the market that does that you know, organically draws in lots of companies. Like we were an investor in Vitru, which just was acquired by Oracle, and their head-to-head competitor was just acquired by Salesforce. And there's another 10 companies in that space, and another one that was
Victoria Ransom in our portfolio.
Yeah, right, and including another one that had been acquired earlier, and it was because they were all helping brands market on social media, and it was kind of like, you know, 1994 when all the Fortune 500s had to, you know, get a domain name and a checkpoint firewall and a web server. A couple of years ago, everybody had to get a Facebook page and a Twitter handle and figure out how to manage all that stuff. And so there were a flood of companies to the market, all of which grew very rapidly for a period of time until it became a more saturated market and was more competitive. So sometimes something does happen in the market that causes lots of people to have the same idea at the same time. You know, and those are good markets to be in because the customers need to buy what you have to sell, and so you have a chance of really getting traction. You know, when it's yet another Instagram, a video, and you know, people are chasing after something where there's already been a big exit. That's harder to make the case that you should make the investment in the nth play in a space that you know doesn't yet have any money changing hand except VC money.
Thank you. So a while back, Tim Draper from DFJ told me that it was his female venture capitalists who often had intuitions about pitches or ideas that were brought in that the males all missed. Everyone, obviously, he had one female venture capitalist, and he said everyone around the table would miss it, but she'd pick it up. So I'm just wondering, do you use your intuition in trusting whether or not something's a goer? Because it is quite a risky business, isn't it? I mean, you have no idea whether all of a sudden a new market's going to pop up. So there's some part after you've done the due diligence of, like, you just don't know, right? Would you say that you would use your intuition?
I do a ton, and I've had the situation where we left a pitch, and I looked at my partners and I said, something's not right about the founder, CEO, and they were opining about, well, will the product work? Because, you know, it was a very intensive electrical engineering, and my background's in chemical engineering and kind of operations and manufacturing. So I kind of missed some of that one technical point that they were going off on, but I'm like, something wasn't right about this relation. I don't know what it was. And it turned out there was all this dirt behind it. But I was only in there for an hour, but I just had this something just was really odd, and they're like, oh, we didn't catch that. And then that untangled over time as, you know, we looked into it a little bit more. It doesn't all, I mean, the guys often have great great intuition too on, maybe different things, but sometimes we come to the same conclusion, but from very different angles, and that's happened quite a number of times, and I'm often struck by it. Even the guys that are more intuitive or more feeling oriented, we'll get to it from different angles.
It's fascinating. It's good to have both the perspectives, I would imagine, working together.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to have both. I mean, so oddly enough, our firm is actually majority women at the GP level, and a woman CFO. And we're known for being intensely analytical in our both analysis of investment opportunities as well as when we're on boards and helping the company figure out when and where to spend capital. And all of us, men and women together, have to really listen to that. Listen to your tummy talk to you. Hopefully not on the mic again, but you have to trust your judgment, and that's I think going to the storytelling session before that, like you have to trust your judgment on people issues. Because people make the businesses, and particularly as investors, it's to me, it's one of the great luxuries of being an investor is I can see an opportunity that's sounds like a phenomenal market, looks like a great product, blah, 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 and it's sort of, but we're all long-only investors with an average holding period approaching 9 years. So that's a long time to work together with someone, and if you don't think you can trust that person, him, her, green, purple, doesn't matter what, you should not make the investment.
So that's, I guess, about the chemistry between the venture capitalist and the entrepreneur as well?
Yeah, or if you just think, I think it's not just a chemistry issue. If you think the person is not tracking when you ask him or her the question, you're trying to get to a specific point, analytical or soft, and the entrepreneur is not understanding the question, or you think there's a whiff of lack of truth, or that person, really importantly, won't be a magnet for talent. Has the savior syndrome. This person is going to be the hero of the company. I mean, one of the things that we explicitly discuss after a company pitches us in our partner meeting is, did the entrepreneur use the word I did, I built, I this, or we? And male or female. Is it an organization that's going to be able to absorb another, 200 to 400 people over the lifetime of our investment? Is it going to grow, or is it going to be one person there saying, I had this really great idea?
That's a really great point. Thank you. Yeah. Any further to add? Okay. So
can I just say one more thing on that point? Actually, I've also had situations. So it depends. We did a lot of early stage, but we kind of have a mix in our portfolio. And sometimes we're looking for new CEOs or new talent at our companies. And that's also been an interesting experience. I try, particularly on my boards, always to sit on the CEO search. And I'm not sure it's gender. I particularly like organizational behavior and kind of construct and how that person is going to work, how they're going to motivate the team, who they're going to hire. So I think it's just a personal interest of mine. But I've also had cases where we've come down to the candidates, and this one was I remember so vividly, and it's a CEO I just love, and he's doing a great job, and the other VC firm involved in this company loves him too. But they wanted kind of the more showy sales guy, and I wanted the feet on the ground kind of distance runner CEO, and we went back and forth and ended up I persuaded them. The recruiter always mentions it to me. Remember how you had to fight for that guy? Now they say oh, we were such geniuses for hiring him. But it was just a particular instance, and like I said, it's so hard to distinguish what's gender or what's just a personal kind of feeling about people. But I have had multiple situations where I've kind of had a little bit of a different insight that has, and then it's kind of been ding to me, interesting.
Yeah, great. I'd add that, the way that I communicate or the way that a founder communicates with me versus when I'm, in the room with one of our male partners, it's different sometimes. Not always, but sometimes. And so I actually may hear a different story. Right. I think sometimes I get the personal backstories a lot more often without having to ask for them. Yes. And I find that's interesting because it gives me a really unique perspective on whoever that founder is, why they're motivated to do that. So again, I can't say if that's my gender, but I find that maybe I get a little bit more personal sometimes in some of those meetings, and they tend to be pretty effective.
And so you can bring a whole different information to the table about making that decision.
But I mean, I think that, you know, like, again, we're a small firm. There's only 3 of us that invest. So generally, for getting to the point where we're making an investment, all 3 of us have met the company, and we all bring 3 very unique perspectives.
That's great.
So
good. So on the crowdfunding side, Indiegogo, over 40% are women who are raising funds, and Kaufman research found that the greater percentages of women business owners often rely on outside debt or personal equity to fund their businesses compared to men. So from your experience, what do you think has kept the numbers of female-led companies raising venture down in the past? And what do you think can be done to support women to see raising venture as an option to fund their businesses?
So I can start.
Right.
You know, if we're talking about companies that are venture-backable companies, so they hit the threshold that are going to have the right kind of risk, reward, and return profile for any of us at the various stages we invest at. I think one of the most important things that you can, there's 2 things that I notice maybe don't happen as often with women, with men. 1, ask for the intro, and get the intro from the best possible resource you have into that, the closest connection. So male or female. And, you know, a lot of times it's going to be a male. You know, we always say some of the best intros we get are from our existing founders. Yep. Right. So if you are a female and you want to start your own startup, work for a startup. Work for a venture-backed startup and develop your network within that. But don't be afraid to ask for the intro, and don't be afraid to keep asking for the intro. I mean, one of the reasons I got into venture was I wasn't afraid to ask for intros. But it was pretty unusual that I did. And I didn't realize that until after the fact. And then, yeah, so that's the first thing. I'd say ask for an intro.
So do you think then that women don't have access to the networks that men do?
I think some of our networks are the same and some of our networks are different.
Okay.
So we can't be afraid. You can't be afraid to ask.
Okay.
And then the other thing I think that I notice sometimes with some of the women that come in to pitch me, and I dig this out of them, and so this is why I bring this up, is they don't brag enough. So I've noticed that I will have female founders that have had, you know, 10, 15 years of experience in an industry at really successful companies, running major business units, who have really key insights. And I don't get that unless I really scratch and dig. And then I've got, you know, a male founder, and, you know, who's in his early 20s, who's maybe worked somewhere for a year or 2, and you'd think he like started Google. So, I mean, I'm serious. So, so don't think that you're tooting your own horn. I mean, the I versus we at the seed stage, it's I. It's what have you done? What have you and your founders done? And how awesome are you? And don't worry about bragging, because I guarantee you, you're not bragging as much as most of the men that come in the door. Right. You won't even come close, even if you feel like you are.
Right.
See, she's a good example.
There's a really well-documented issue that women have. It's called the imposter syndrome. I'm the admit accident, the hiring mistake. I don't really belong here. I have to work so much hard. You know, I have to work harder because I don't really belong here. And sometimes that comes through when women do come and pitch. And so by the time you've made it to meet one of us, you belong there. I mean, we probably won't back you. I mean, we see 1,000 deals a year and do about 10. So we probably won't back you, just statistically speaking. But you pass through a lot of filters to get to a meeting with a VC. Act like you belong. Like one of the things I like to do is I'm a Stanford GSB alumna, and I do the first-year mentee program every year. And I had, actually I had a Japanese woman as my mentee years ago, and I'm going to Japan on Wednesday to go visit her. So we remained really good friends. And after school, she worked for me for a while, and she kept saying, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm like, Fujio, stop it with the goddamn thank yous. It makes it sound like you didn't earn your job here. You know, you're here because I think you're really well qualified to be here. So stop it with acting like you don't belong. And I think that's one of the things. Like, you have to walk into meetings with your shoulders squared like you belong, and not say, oh, thank you so much for taking the meeting. It's our job to take meetings with people.
Yeah, great advice. Rachel?
I now forget the actual original question. I was so intrigued by what everyone was saying. I'm like, yeah,
it's been a great conversation.
That's true.
It's just about
the funding on Kickstarter.
The low numbers. And if you've got any tips.
I
know you tweeted me the other day, get a good team. That's the tip.
Yeah, and also how big you think. I struggle with that too. I think someone was talking about it earlier today. So some of the Kickstarters and whatever, you're kind of thinking, okay, we're going to be this nice little business over there, and that's fine. I don't think venture's for everyone. In fact, we're in a really small, like our Venn diagram of where things overcross is pretty small amount of the universe. So in Silicon Valley, it feels like it's the end-all be-all, but there's incredible businesses that were not started with venture capital funding and that scale. But I think the really thing is our ideal is we scale fast. We're in businesses that scale in incredible ways. And so I wonder, maybe it's my personal bias about myself, is how big some of the women are thinking in some of these Kickstarter or whatever. It's like, that's nice, but they're might not going to scale to the kind of businesses that we fund, and so maybe that's why they're going for funding over there. It fits the kind of businesses they're going to run, and that's okay, but that's why maybe I could see that they're funding a lot of women. And women, I think, in this country, I don't know what the stats are, but you do often hear the small and medium business, the majority are women run. They're often just an individual, one or two. Yeah. But that's a different kind of scale where the ambition of thinking big, and since I struggle with that myself and have to get pushed along often by men to think bigger, I can see as that holds some entrepreneurs back in going for VC funding.
Yes, sure.
Can I just say something more? We also need more women to come up in business and education in lanes that are going to put you in a position to be the CEO. Mm-hmm. So meaning, CEO in tech, CEOs come from product management, engineering, and sales. They don't come from HR, they don't come from legal, they don't come from corporate marketing, they don't come from cost centers. They come from the people who are in charge of making the product and making the revenue. And people who are used to living in the really high pressure environments and making a lot of decisions and attracting a lot of people to follow them and going for it. And those disciplines, the product and the revenue-oriented disciplines, are the places that breed successful entrepreneurs. And so if you want to be a successful entrepreneur and you want to cut your teeth in a venture-funded startup or even a larger incumbent tech company, go into one of those kinds of departments. Don't be a VP of finance or an HR person or something else. I mean, I will say I derogatorily call these pink-collar ghettos. So I don't go to one of those places. Go to one of the places where the action is so that you can position yourself to be a CEO.
And that's a great way to break your teeth, to know whether or not this is for you, really, isn't it? Rather than doing your own startup immediately. Yeah? Well, that's a really good lead into my next question, because in the work that I've done through the video interviews, there's a couple of points that have come up that women have been accused of not doing, and one of them is not thinking big enough, which Rachel, you brought up, and there's another one is that we don't take enough risks, or we treat risk in a very different way than men do. And the other one is lack of confidence. I almost forgot it. Yeah. I must have missed out on all of those. But I'm wondering what advice you would give, or whether you think that this is bullshit or if it's the truth. And obviously we're generalising, we're not talking individually, because I feel like I don't relate to those issues myself, and that's why I had to do the video interviews to find out what the problems were. So could you give me some feedback about whether this fits for you from your experience, because you've obviously had great experience with entrepreneurs and women?
I mean, I think if you're going to talk about not big enough, if you're not thinking big enough, it's probably pretty hard to get to a meeting with any of us. So that would be sort of my filter there at that point. Would say most of the women that come in, just like most of the founders that come in, are thinking about big enough. I mean, we may make choices to say this isn't big enough for us, but you're generally not going to get past a first level filter if you're not thinking big enough, period. So that's how I address that one.
Okay. Any other thoughts, anyone?
Well, there was lack of confidence.
Lack of confidence and a different experience of risk. So either we're more risk averse or we see risk and try and be much more careful around it.
I thought the risk thing came out as why I read this article once, blog, I forget, one of the male venture capitalists wrote it about women. There aren't a lot of women venture capitalists because we don't like to take risks, and that funding entrepreneurs is like gambling. And the whole thesis of that blog, I just did not make sense to me, because actually, for this whole risk thing, we're actually trying to fund to milestones to mitigate risks along the way.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're trying to figure out, the team that is less risky than the other team that's doing the same thing that came in.
Yep.
And we're trying to help, the founders or, as a board member, try to understand, like, well, if we could figure this out, that'll help us with our next funding milestone or customer milestone or whatever. So if we could break this. So actually, we're kind of in a little bit of a risk mitigation business. Now, what we do is hard. I won't take any credit. What our entrepreneurs do, and I think that's why I love what I do. I get to work with what I think are the smartest people in the world, doing incredible things and making a big difference, and I get to kind of shadow them around and try to be helpful when I can. But what they do is very challenging. But what we do is trying to kind of mitigate this risk along the way. So I thought that just makes no sense to me at all. And in terms of the entrepreneurs, I mean, yes, they take big risks to start something from scratch versus like doing your job day in and day out from 9 to 5. But also, I mean, they're doing it because it's energizing. If you don't find it energizing and exciting, it shouldn't be about like, I want to go jump off a bridge. It's about, I think this is really cool to be part of an incredible team with smart, motivated people and take on something. It's not just like pure risk for adrenaline's sake. So that whole context about that just doesn't resonate with me at all.
Yeah.
But I think in a way, I mean, I think it's actually having the competitive appetite and the seeking something new and pushing yourself toward that. It's not so much necessarily, I don't think that risk is exactly the right word for that, but a willingness to try something new and to just keep pushing, right? I mean, just as you have to do in sports when you don't know if you can do something and you don't know if you can do something and you don't know if you can win, but you won't know if you don't try, and I think that's a place where I see women holding themselves back, is that I don't, and I'm actually on a sports team, and I have women teammates who frustrate me no end, because they'll say, well, the other team is bigger, we're going to lose. And it's like, well, if we go to the regatta thinking we're going to lose, then surely we will lose. But if we go thinking, I prepared really well, I'm going to eat right that morning, I'm going to wake up and get out there and just roll my heart out, we might win. And sometimes we do win. Yeah. And so this is another experience I've had with the women coming out of the GSB that really frustrates me, and where Sheryl Sandberg's talk resonates incredibly is, we had a woman work for us as a summer associate a few years ago. And she, my God, the most intimidating woman on the planet. So MIT, straight A's in math, Russian. Then a master's, then was head of product management and virtualization at Oracle. And by the way, she looks like a Russian model. And then she's going to Stanford Business School. And she's awesome. She's actually been in a series of startups. But when she graduated, she asked to meet with me. And she said, and she was engaged to be married. And she said, all my classmates are not pushing themselves to take startup jobs because they think in a couple years they're going to want to have kids. So why should they push hard now, because then they're going to want to have kids and then they'll back back. And she said, what do you think of that? And I go, total fucking bullshit. Like, your job right now before you have kids is push yourself so hard so that you're really invaluable to the company, so that when you do have kids, I'm not saying don't have kids, I have children. When you do have kids, they make accommodations for you because you're so valuable, they can't let go of you. And she's like, yes, please, you know, and now she's got a couple little kids too, and she's working in a startup, and her husband has his own startup. So it's a crazy life, but they're getting all the things they wanted out of it.
Right.
But that meant that she had to go for it from day one.
Yeah, great.
And talk about that.
Very inspiring.
I don't know,
Thank
that
you.
confidence, the confidence
Yes,
point.
yes.
Because I've read Women Don't Ask, and I think that book's so great because I was like,
And
oh,
also-
I do that shit, you know?
Don't ask for the money, and if you're
Yeah.
going for venture, you've got to
it's-
ask for money.
Right. It's all about the
unbelievable,
money.
the examples, and when I've been at this firm 4 years, and I had no venture or experience before, so it was a very steep learning curve. But a lot of the things I was like, oh, I did that. I used to go into the board meeting, and Sheryl Sandberg talked about that in her video too. I used to sit in the back because I was an observer in the board, and maybe then everyone was intimidating, and I maybe didn't belong there, and I was always the only one. And I'm like, wait, that guy, he's an observer too, and he and I are the same age, and I have better education and experience. Why am I sitting here? So I just totally changed that. But I think because I experience it myself, even more. Every woman that calls me and says, I'm thinking about this job, or I just got this job, or the first thing I say is, did you ask for more money? And I often get this long pause. Well, I think it was a fair offer. I said, I don't care what the offer is. I didn't ask you what the offer is. I just asked, did you ask for more money? And so many people have come up to me after panels and said, yeah, I graduated from Stanford MBA or whatever, and I didn't ask 6 months ago. I'm like, why didn't you ask? Oh, I thought it was a good offer. Well, that's the confidence, some of the confidence of you deserve it. If you start out low, you'll end up low. And I think that's pervasive, and that is that to me is a gender issue, and it takes a lot of self-awareness to start looking at all the times, oh, I've done that, oh, I'm exactly that person.
That's, let me just say, because one of the things we're looking for when we're evaluating entrepreneurs is, are you going to be dogged in the fight? And so we expect you to be dogged in the fight for yourself, because it's a leading indicator of how you'll act when you as CEO are negotiating with your big customers, are negotiating to sell the company, are trying to hire other people. Like, do you go for it? And so if you sit back and you're just kind of nice and passive, we're not going to think that you're going to want to crush the competition.
Yeah, no global domination there.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was really informative. And so my last question is, I'm really interested in the startup culture. And Deo Resi said to me, well, the startup culture was actually created by men. And as a result, it's 24/7, very intense. You never stop. You don't have time for work, for family and personal life. And as a result, not many women are interested in buying into that culture. And the women that I've been around, I always advise them to be creative about making a startup culture for women. We can do it. We're multitaskers and also really creative people. And I was wondering, what is the life like of a female venture capitalist? How do you manage to keep work-life balance? Because I think it's a really important piece, that we're not just workaholics, hopefully. Tell us about it.
Go ahead. I'm not sure I do,
Yeah.
but so I mean, I'm single. I don't have kids, so it's a little easier, I would say. And I definitely find times where I get sucked into my job. I mean, it's a 24/7 job, and I mean, especially here. And I spent the last 10 years in New York before moving out here last year, and it's interesting kind of seeing the difference. In New York, you can kind of escape it. Here, there's kind of no escaping it. But I mean, it's good and bad. It means you never know. I'm looking for an apartment, and I meet a founder, at the apartment search thing, and you got a meeting. So anyway, the point is, you're always on. But I think for me, what I've found is just it's important to kind of set 1 or 2 priorities outside of work that I'm going to commit to doing every week. And so I actually got really good advice from a female partner at a law firm here that I really admire. And she said, she has kids. She works all the time. She's really busy. She's like, I have one of my best friends and we walk once a week together every week And so I actually started doing that with a female friend of mine who's a founder. And sometimes we talk about work. Sometimes we talk about being a woman in the space. Sometimes we talk gossip, But for me, like that's my release. So I think it's important just to be able to disconnect, to say like, this is the 2 hours I'm going to not check my email, and then I'll be on, the rest of the time. So.
Okay. Any other tips or
Well, I mean, just one
insights?
point. I mean, my viewpoint on reality is that jobs with a lot of financial upside are all-consuming jobs. And if you want to be, you know, if you're going to, so I come from, I was 5 years at Bain & Company, where we did 100, 120 hours a week, you know, so it's, but you're also paid like dramatically more than most of your peers. So if you want that kind of financial upside, you likely also have to make a big personal commitment. Now, I completely agree with Stephanie. You have to figure out the handful of things that really matter to you and stack rank your life so that you do those things. And it might mean that you set a bunch of other things aside. I mean, for me, for example, I have kids, I have a job I love, and I wanted to take up this sport recently. I abandoned a whole bunch of other stuff that I did to carve out 10 hours a week to do my sport. But so that means that, you know, it just changed the dimensions of the time usage. And so I think you have to be happy, which isn't to say balance. To be happy, you have to live a life in accordance with your values, and you have to know what you value, and whether that's you really value having breakfast with your kids or dinner with your husband or the walk with your friends or something, or it's only winning at all costs on your business. You have to figure out what it is you value and make the time allocation map to that. And it's actually really useful to sort of step back and say, out of all the hours in a week, what am I doing? And are those things I should be doing? Or also, are they things I can delegate to a nanny, to my admin, to a new VP of marketing, to somebody else? Is there somebody who can take some of the stuff off my plate so I can do what I need to do?
That's great.
I knew I was really neurotic, so when I was looking to figure out what to do next, I said, what am I going to do that I'm so compelled by? So when I am working weekends and nights, because I'll do that no matter what, that I'm just really passionate about what I'm doing. And so, yeah, and you know, I'm sure if you ask my fiance, he will just say, like, yeah, she works all the time. But the one thing about our job that is really important to me is I have a ton of autonomy and flexibility. So, you know, I might be working all weekend because we're, you know, doing a deal, a term sheet came in, and we're working through the docs, and I'm one of those people who obsess, so I can't just like let the lawyer do everything. I have to look at it all myself as well. Even when I have, you know, great legal team, that's just my personality. And so there'll be times with that, and then I'll say, you know what, I have to take off 4 hours on Friday and have lunch with my sister, or, you know, do something else, and I'll have that flexibility to kind of set, you know, I just worked all day Sunday and I'm taking off, you know, half a day Wednesday. So and then I'll pay for it, you know, that night. But you know, you kind of can work around what you want to do. And I think the other thing that I'm learning that I could get better at is what to say no to, and that comes back to the prioritization. You know, I used to, you know, everyone, if I could speak, if I could travel here, if I could do that, yes, yes, yes. And finally I said, you know, I have no time for myself, and I'm tired, and I'm not doing as good of a job for the things that are really important to me. And so slowly, I'm not great at it, but slowly starting to say no to the random person who writes me with no connection at all that, you know, needs career search help. It's like slowly feeling okay to say no to those things, which I still have to practice.
The other thing I think that's really important is also who your partner is and what your partner, male or female, part of the deal is if you're involved in a relationship, because it's very rare to see two really high-powered people together in a relationship with kids, right? I mean, somebody, you know, the fact is somebody does have to actually raise the kids unless you decide to completely outsource it. And then, you know, which I have friends from B school where it was a husband and wife team who were co-CEO of a series of companies, and they actually said in their holiday letter, like, you know, the kids are like fine wine and we'll enjoy them when we're retired, and this kind of, you know, just, that was not in accordance with my values. But seriously, I mean, I do think women getting ahead in business has a lot to do with men being able to be more oriented toward the home. And I'm lucky I have a husband who works a 9-to-5 job, and he comes home to let our nanny get off work, and I don't. And that works for us. And it is definitely men's, the men's role in the family is a huge part of a cultural transition that has to happen to enable more women to be more senior in America. And that means that we also have to honor men who make those choices, just as we honor women who make the choice to be founders of startups.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I wondered if I could just ask you each what it's like to be a female venture capitalist. Like, what are the pluses and what are the minuses? Obviously, each of you have got a personal take on that.
Oh, I mean, I think it's the greatest job in the world. I mean, it's your job to know everything new that's going on, to meet passionate, driven, smart people, and to make a handful of choices a year to get involved over the long term with some, things that have the possibility to change, things and people who have the possibility to change the world. And as Rachel said, it's actually a pretty flexible. It's an all-consuming job with a lot of flexibility. So you can be in specific places in, the time-space continuum when you need to, and then you can do and then you end up being able to push the work off to another time. So for me, it actually worked out. I switched to it specifically because I wanted to not have as much business travel as I had in my prior life. And that worked out really well while my kids were younger.
Great. And any negatives at all that you tolerate for all those good things?
It's very different to work in a partnership. I don't mean this to sound like a knock on Scale VP because I love my partnerships, but it's very different to work in a partnership than it is to be a line executive because everybody votes. And, so there's no one person in charge, and it's all about consensus, and we've been together a long time, and we all really like each other, but you end up kind of having to sort of mull things along, whereas when you're a line executive, as I was before I started this, you're in charge, you make decisions, you hire and fire people, you decide you're rolling out this new product, this is what the thing is gonna look like, so the freedom to operate in that sense is very different.
Okay. What about you?
I'd echo. I love my job. I have the greatest job in the world. So,
okay.
I wouldn't trade it for anything right now. One thing that I think uniquely female about my job that I find really interesting and really exciting, and there's probably like one or two of you in this room that have said this to me. A lot of times I'm the first female venture capitalist that a lot of the founders meet, just because I'm a seed stage investor, and I watch these women walk into the room, and I just can see the sigh of relief go over them.
That's nice.
And then half the time they actually say it to me, and I've had people stop me in meetings and say, hey, can I just talk to you about this separately from this? And so I think that's been a really unique and rewarding part of what I do. I've actually made a couple really good friends who I didn't invest in their companies, but they've become really close friends because I think the barrier for us is that much lower because there's so few of us. And I think on both sides of the table we recognize that. And so I think there's I think that's been really, really rewarding for me. And on top of the fact that I absolutely love what I do. The fact that, I can have that kind of connection. Can I have that kind of connection with a male founder? To a certain extent, but I think it's very unique that I can have that with a few female founders, whether or not I make the investment.
I actually had that experience. The first female venture capitalist I pitched to, I was like, oh, this is fabulous. After all men in Europe, it was like such a great experience. I just thought she was the bee's knees.
And I get it a lot when it's a female-oriented company pitching, because we don't have to explain how this works to you. No. So.
What about you, Rachel?
Yeah, I would say it's a lot of fun. I think the one thing, because I'm hard on myself, is I'm always kind of like have to do a lot of homework, kind of figuring out, is this right? Am I trusting my gut, or am I doing this for these reasons, or is this the way to go? So there's a lot of kind of churning in it because you're constantly making decisions, and I take it really the responsibility around investing other people's money, and what are the implications of that. And so sometimes that, I get that churn of like, oh, and then the trust myself comes out of it at the end. I'm like, oh yeah, now I got it, and now I can move forward. But there are some days where I'm like, oh, this job's gonna kill me because I just take it so I get so into it and want to try to our whole job, the only reason we exist is to make money for other people, not to build awesome, really cool companies. That's a side benefit. And so, some of that can be a lot of churn. Of kind of your inner voice about what to do, but I love kind of getting on the phone with the CEO that I've worked with for 3 years, and we just got this major sale, or we're navigating through a big issue, and I get to coach. They're all hims, so I get to coach him on it, or kind of be a feedback, or an insight comes out of a discussion. I mean, it's super rewarding. And then I would agree with Stephanie. I mean, just that moment of the women in the office or whatever, that I'm like, whew, or coming here. I always go to a women private equity event that's all women, and I'm like, I can say, I like her purse, I like her shoes, it's not the same conversation when I come into the room with 8 guys, and so those moments, and I seek them out because it is unique to be in spaces like this. So.
And Stephanie, were there any negatives for you? I forgot to ask.
Negatives? I mean, I think what I've learned is that there's going to be times where maybe as a female, I'm the only one in the room. Okay. And that can sometimes it can be uncomfortable, but can be empowering too. So I wouldn't call it a negative, but I think I am recognizing that there's ways I can be effective, and they may be different than the way that some men will be effective, but I can be just as effective in terms of generating my source of deal flow and relating to entrepreneurs, even though, despite me being a female or because I'm a female.
Okay, great. So do we open the floor now for some questions? Has anyone got any questions? Is there a roving mic at all?
Thank you. I actually have, whoa, that's loud. Okay, I actually have 2 questions for you. The first one is, when you're looking at approaching a venture capitalist, is there a percentage you should look at and say, I should raise this amount of money and ask for that amount of money, or I should ask for 100% of it and see what I land with, or something along those lines?
You should ask for the amount your business needs. So we don't want to refinance your company in the first 18 months. Right. So figure out how much you're going to burn and ask for at least 18 months of runway.
That's a really good question, actually, because I've heard from some of the stats that women tend to ask for less than what they actually end up needing, and men tend to ask for too much, like more than they actually need. Have you found that at all?
I mean, now there's so much conversation about being lean, the least amount that you need. Why would you take more dilution if you don't have to? So I think we're being really smart about figuring out what it is you need, but don't if it's going to take more, do that up front so that you're not, if you're coming back every 6-9 months for more money, it might not work, and it will also be incredibly painful. Every financing, it takes a ton of time on both sides, on the CEO's side as well as our side, and so if you can work that out for as long as you can, try to do that, but be smart about dilution, to yourself.
Really
I mean, at the seed stage, 18 months, and because you need to prove a certain number of metrics out, and unless you're that rare rocket ship, you're going to need at least a year to demonstrate stuff. It's going to take you 3 months to raise your Series A, and then a little bit of a buffer. So, 18 months or more if you can get it. And right now, there's a lot of seed capital out there. So,
and then the other question is, when you're approaching all of these things, if you have situations in your life like a short sale or something along those lines that it affects your personal, does that affect your business even if it's a corporation?
A mortgage where you have to make Do you guys do background checks on people you do?
Yeah, I remember we hired a CTO at one of my companies who had really could not afford the house he was living in, and we had to move him. And so we had to decide, was it worth it? And then we were like, oh, it's personal finance. It's a good thing we're hiring him from the CTO and not the CFO. But he's been phenomenal, and we keep him out of kind of business matters in that regard. And so we made some concessions. The CEO thought he was good enough and he turned out he is good enough to make some concessions for. It depends what you're doing. I wouldn't say it's a make or break it issue. It just kind of depends.
I mean, at the end of the day, one thing we appreciate is transparency, whoever you are.
Yeah,
So,
that's good.
you know, I think the reality is that we've talked about this. It could be a 10-year-long relationship, in a sense. And so the ability for us and for you to be honest about anything that might impact the business is important. And, you know, it doesn't mean revealing every personal matter that you're going through, but, you know, being transparent and upfront about something that may have an impact. You know, there's a potential move 6 months down the road, and it's, you know, to another country. That's something that's material. Like, I should know that. But, you know, we do reference checks and everything on folks' personal reference checks, so that come from the founders.
But the other thing I just want to say is don't let a failure in your past prevent you from trying again, right? Because there are very few founders of successful companies who are first-time founders. And many times people have a company, they raise a round or so, it doesn't work out, they bring it home, and if you acted respectfully in the process and maintained your integrity and kind of acted on behalf of the whole good, even if everybody lost all their money, you can raise money again. You know, and it's almost a badge of honor here that it's like skiing, right? If you haven't failed, you haven't tried hard enough, because most startups do fail. So having something that hasn't gone exactly as you planned or hoped in your past shouldn't be an impediment to trying again.
Very inspiring.
Now, if it's your third time, you know, maybe just get a job.
Give up. Yes.
I have a question. So is there such a thing as a guide? Make
sure you have. Hang on.
I was talking loud enough.
They want to get it on tape.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought there was a microphone on this side of the room.
Hi, so my question is there like a guide to when you go to see a VC, at what stage of business in, like a, I guess, VC for dummies, or something that you can go and look at to know what stage should I be in with my business, especially if it's like an internet or website type business, as to when do I go to a VC to get capital, because now I need to bring people in, I need to do all these things, but I'm not sure exactly when I should be going in, and what are the rules, and what do you need for us to present to you, etc.
There's tons of blogs out there, tons of blog posts. I mean, I wrote a blog post for Women 2.0. They have a book coming out, and mine's about fundraising, and it's on my blog. But you know, there's tons of resources online about it that spell it out. I mean, the reality is, you know, you're most likely at the very early stages starting talking to angels and friends and family, right, first, and then you go to seed, but you might look small seed. You might just talk to angels, high net worth individuals. Ideally, people that are going to bring some value beyond just a check, though, to your company, because that's what friends and family are for. That's why they call it friends, family, and fools. So it's the three F's.
People who are parted with their money.
Right.
Yeah.
But like, you know, you want to bring in angels that are going to add some value. They have some insights into, you know, whatever you're doing. And then, but I think as long as you've got some concept of what you're working on, a working prototype, some customer feedback, some validation from the market, even if you're too early to raise money, it's never too early to kind of start building those relationships. And I think that goes back to asking for the intros. And it's asking the people you know and the people you're getting to, who are the people I should be talking to at this stage? And, you know, can you make an intro? And then being upfront to say, I mean, I have founders all the time that email me and say, I'm not ready to raise yet. You know, should we have the conversation? And sometimes I say, let's wait until you feel like you've got a product in place. Other times it's like, well, let's do a 20-minute phone call to talk about the things I might want to see from you in order for it to be ready.
Actually, I'm afraid that we're out of time. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but we're way over.
I'm
and
sorry.
The Taste of Technology reception is about to start. So I'm going to let Amanda wrap up the panel, and thank you all for participating.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been a fabulous conversation.